juicing. Let me get this Krispy Kreme in here. We'll be good to go. And then she said to me, I bet you have a blocked colon. Now, horrible visuals came to mind. I'm thinking, how are we going to unblock this bad boy? Here, attach this to your garden hose. Hey, I have neighbors. I'll get a letter from the Homeowners Association. Please do not clean your colon on front lawn. Signed, all of us. She said it's very easy to cleanse your colon. She said, you're juicing, right? Yeah! Take these herbs, put them in your juice 3 times a day. After a month, your colon will be clean. I don't know what was in the herbs, but I called her an hour and a half later from the bathroom. Hey, crazy lady! I'm sending back the rest of the herbs. Mission accomplished. My colon is clean. I swallowed a quarter when I was 7. $50 came out.
Good morning. It's Sunday. Thank God it's Sunday, June the 25th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after we have John Pinette, and after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump, Ice Cube, the Rape of the Mind, the No Free Lunch, and Bishop-Barron. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Most of America's leading entrepreneurs are bound to the masts of their fortunes. They are allowed to keep their wealth only as long as they invest it in others. In a real sense, they can keep only what they give away. It has been given to others in the form of investments. It is embodied in a vast web of enterprises that retains its worth only through constant work and sacrifice. Capitalism is a system that begins not with taking, but with giving to others. George Gilder. This so beautifully encapsulates the connection between free enterprise and human flourishing. The very incentives of a market economy first promote flourishing by demanding service to others, if one is to meet profitability in the marketplace. But then, having achieved wealth, capital is deployed in the very markets that drive future growth and prosperity. Successful entrepreneurs may choose to bury their money or burn their money, providing little social benefit after the first act, but that would be perilous to their own self-interest. The system itself would never intend such. Rather, it incents reinvestment, the pursuit of further return on investment, and thus activities that inevitably better those around him or her as well.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a few seconds of Tim Scott.
How many of y'all believe that we should secure our southern border today? Today. Not tomorrow, but today. Yes, we all believe this. We all know this to be true.
And that was a town hall with Senator Tim Scott. Back in a minute. Thank you. Another minute with Senator Tim Scott.
To suggest that the only way for a child of color to make it in this nation is to be the exception and not the rule is a lie from the pit of hell. A lie from the pit of hell. But then President Obama decided to jump in as well. I can't hear you. Oh, okay. I heard you. Okay. He says, I'm too optimistic. I have been accused of being too optimistic, too positive, too proud to be an American. For those accounts, I am guilty. Guilty as charged. I love America. I love our country.
And that was, again, Senator Tim Scott. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
There is something in the glorious myth of strength and courage that confuses all of us. Physical strength is too frequently confused with spiritual strength. Bravery and heroism are, indeed, needed qualities in battle. Yet analysis of soldiers in combat shows that each one of them has to conduct a constant battle against his own fears. The brave are the ones who can check their fears, who can cope with the paralyzing fantasies that fear creates, and who can control the desire to regress into childish escapism. A man cannot be forced to become a hero, and it is ridiculous to punish him if he is not. It is as pointless as punishing him for bleeding or fainting. The hero, the man who offers himself up to death for the sake of others, is found more in mythology than in reality. Psychology and anthropology have shown that the hero myth is related to eternal dream images. The hero symbolizes the rebellious new generation, the strong son becoming stronger than the father. He symbolizes, too, our wish to be more mature and to take responsibility into our own hands. We need the myth for the inspiration it offers us. We commemorate with posthumous glorification the hero feats of the few who have, throughout history, offered themselves up as sacrifices to their comrades or to society. Yet what do we know about their real motives? During the Second World War, I gave psychiatric treatment to many soldiers. As I spoke and worked with them, I became increasingly conscious of how dangerous it is to stick the simple label hero or coward on any man. One of my patients, for example, was a boy who had received high military decoration because he had stuck to a lonely place with his machine gun, firing automatically until the enemy was forced to withdraw. In the course of his treatment, the boy confessed that his apparent heroism was really the result of paralyzing fear, which had made it impossible for him to follow his commander's order to retreat. No one really can tell how he will behave in times of danger. Each person will solve the frightening test that reality confronts him with in his own way. Several will accept the challenge and stand up to it. Some over-defensive, compulsive individuals may even welcome this burden as a test of their strength. Still others, whose instability has deep roots in the past, will unconsciously take advantage of a perilous situation to break down completely and let their tears and emotions go. Freud has directed our attention to the peculiar interplay between eternal and internal dangers, between frightening reality and equally frightening fantasy. Objective, recognizable dangers often stimulate the mind to alertness and encourage it to set up its inner defenses. But there are subjective panic creators too: frustration, feeling of guilt, infantile horror fantasies. And these can often be so terrorizing in their effects that all our cultural defenses collapse. Many men who face the test of reality with stalwart courage can be brought to collapse by apparent trivia, which somehow touch them in a vulnerable spot. Another of my wartime patients mentioned previously showed a pattern. The young fighter pilot, who had flown 40 combat missions without any sign of fear or panic, suddenly broke down completely in an air raid shelter in London. In the course of treatment, it became apparent that this young man was bitterly unhappy about his personal relationships. He did not get along with his commanding officer. He had had a serious quarrel with his girlfriend the night before his breakdown. A shy and withdrawn person, when he suddenly found himself in the shelter with a frightened group about him, he became contaminated by the fear in the atmosphere. Weakened by recent unhappiness, he found himself completely unable to put up the inner defenses that had served him so well under the frightening experiences of active war. Are we to say that he was less of a hero than the much decorated machine gunner? There still lives in all of us an admiration for bravado, for the theatrical display of courage, for the devil-may-care invitation to destruction. We are beginning to recognize now that real courage is different. It is at the same time an expression of faith in life and a resignation to death. Courage is not something that can be forced on a man from the outside. It has to come from inside him. In the reality of modern war, the impersonal Moloch, a man can be easily reduced to a feeling of helplessness and dependency. Personal courage can turn the tide of battle in a hand-to-hand encounter, but personal courage is no defense against bombs and machine guns. Today, reckless courage, as we have glorified it, is less important than personal morale, faith, conviction, knowledge, and adequate preparation. A boy of 17 years of age is drafted into the Army. He has spent his entire life in a small town in Texas. He receives training in the routine of Army life and the use of his weapons. Soon thereafter, he is sent to Korea, and almost immediately he is taken prisoner. Now, this child has to defend himself against the propaganda barrage which well-trained communist theoreticians daily hurl at him. His education is limited, his background narrow, his political training inadequate. He even tries to escape from his prison camp, but is caught. As a result, the enemy's mental hold on him increases. His great disappointment makes him feel trapped. Finally, he surrenders and collaborates. How can a military court hold him responsible and even punishable for the fact that he finally gave in to enemy propaganda? This is part of the story of Corporal Claude Batchelor, recently sentenced to 20 years imprisonment for collaboration with the enemy. I would venture to guess that it could have been the story of nearly any American boy of similar background. After the Second World War, several European countries had to face the difficult problem of how to treat those members of the underground who, after torture by the Nazis, had confessed and betrayed their compatriots. In Holland, a court of honor was established to judge these special cases. This court reached the following conclusions. No man can possibly vouch for it that under no circumstances will he confess, cooperate, or betray his country. No man who has not himself gone through the hell which communists and Nazis have been so able to organize has any right to judge the conduct of a man who did. Psychological torture is more effective in many cases than physical torture. This is all the more true of the victim who has above-average intellectual background. It seems that intelligence makes physical torture more easily bearable, but at the same time exposes one more to the impact of mental torture. Anyone who submitted under such circumstances to the enemy after having given proof of his loyalty, patriotism, and courage will suffer terribly because his condemnation of himself will always be more severe than that of any judge. There is, however, not the slightest reason for shame, nor for considering such a person incapacitated for giving leadership. On the contrary, more than outsiders, he will know what superhuman strength is required to resist the subtle methods of mental torture. And more than outsiders, he can be helpful to others to prepare themselves for the ordeal as far as that is possible. From a letter written by G. Van Heuven Godard, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, President of the Dutch Court of Honor, which appeared in the New York Times, March 15, 1954. The morale-boosting idea. When we look at the varieties of human behavior under extreme and
Thank you. And now, Vivek Ramaswamy.
We need to end this mental health epidemic, not just with anger. I'm not angry at trans people. I'm not. I'm frustrated with the culture that venerates a mental health illness that we should be treating instead of actually throwing kerosene on and fueling to spread like wildfire across this country. I know you're not supposed to say many of those things out loud, but I just think it's important that we speak truth, because that's got to be the first step towards getting to a solution. And that's what I'm hoping to deliver.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a minute and a half with Donald Trump.
They want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I had such a nice life before. I had the greatest life. But you know what? I would do it again. A lot of people say, would you do it again? I said, absolutely, because this country has such potential. We're going to make this country greater than ever before. Absolutely. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. I'm never going to let them silence you. And in the end, they're not after me, they're after you. And I just happen to be standing in the way. But we're not going to let anything happen to you that's bad, and we've got to start with this election.
And that was former President Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, almost 4 minutes with, of all people, Ice Cube.
Yo, what's cracking? You know what it is. It's your homeboy Ice Cube. And some of you may not have realized that I'm not part of the club. And a lot of you listening to me right here, right now, you're not part of the club either. And what I realized with the club is what makes them so mad is when you don't want to be a part of their fucking club. That pisses them off. What club am I talking about? I'm talking about the club of gatekeepers that we all got to deal with. You know who they are, and they definitely know who they are. A lot of people would be like, what? Who? Come on, man, stop playing. So, ever since I put out the contract with Black America, you know they've been fucking with me. Here and there, this and that. But it's cool, you know. I expect that. You know, I've been working with, on the big three for a long time, and you know how they've been fucking with me with that. I done made it, plain, simple, and clear what they've been doing. The NBA been fucking with us. Now, a lot of people might say, like, well, but kid, you want to work with the NBA. Really, I don't give a fuck about working with the NBA. What I want them to do, when I say work with us, is to stop working against us. Stop doing that bullshit behind the scenes that we know you're doing. Mainstream media, they ain't fucking with us. And that's cool. We can do it ourselves, you know what I'm saying? We still on the rise without these motherfuckers. So we don't need them, you don't need them. So what am I going to do to deal with these motherfucking gatekeepers? Well, what I'm going to do is go on a Fuck the Gatekeepers podcast tour. And I'm going to go talk to everybody, and get a chance to get my message out to the people. Be able to let people hear from me, and you might agree, you might not, but the important thing is, for me to go on these platforms, say what I feel about what I think. And, some people may get pissed off because I'm going to talk to everybody. I'm not playing. And it's gonna be a crazy summer. It's gonna be fun. Appreciate y'all. Always support the big three. Hopefully I'm doing stuff that you guys dig. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for people that's bored as fuck in the summer with summer sports and want something cool like the big three. So here we are. Appreciate you. Much love, much respect from your homeboy Ice Cube. Remember that.
And that was Ice Cube. And I say of all people because I know of him as a rapper. And you would figure that he, as a rapper, would be part of the, as he refers to it, gatekeepers. And I assume what he means by gatekeepers, because his whole message is a little bit on the cryptic side. You really have to understand, I guess, who he is and what he's been up to lately to understand completely what he's talking about. But I assume gatekeepers means the community members, the left-wing Democrat community members that basically set the rules for black people. And and then the big three, I think it seems it's a sporting thing, an after-school sports program of some sort. And apparently he's getting some resistance from the NBA and others on that. But anyways, I thought it was an interesting message. And again, he is basically coming out and saying that he's not what you expect him to be. That's seems to be the overall message. So that's why I said of all people. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Peace be with you. Friends, the readings for today are really magnificent, and they are all about something central to the spiritual life, namely fear. Now, what do I mean? Well, years ago, I was on a retreat, and the retreat director said there are two basic questions always to ask. First, what do you want? Deep down, what do you want? Secondly, what are you afraid of? Deep down. So we want all kinds of things, but what is it that finally and ultimately you want? That's a really clarifying question. Can I propose it now to everyone listening? What are you looking for? You know, when a young kid would come to a Benedictine monastery, still true to this day in a more formal way, but they'd be asked, what do you seek? What do you want here? But the second great clarifying question is, what are you afraid of? So again, we're afraid of all sorts of things. But deep down, ultimately, what are you afraid of? In a way, answering those two questions will tell you everything you need to know about yourself, spiritually speaking. So with that in mind, let's look at reading number 1, which is from the great prophet Jeremiah. Is there anybody in the Old Testament more fascinating than Jeremiah, who was given this kind of awful assignment? He's called to be a prophet, and the message he has for Israel is this terrible message. And the Lord tells him, and it turns out to be true, no one's going to listen to you, and they're all going to end up hating you. Well, that's exactly what happened with Jeremiah. So listen to him now. We hear him speaking. I hear the whisperings of many. Terror on every side. Denounce. Let us denounce him. All those who are my friends are on the watch for any misstep of mine. Well, here's the prophet in the midst of his fear and despair. I was called to deliver this message. I've done so. And what's the result? Everybody hates me. Terror on every side. Everybody's denouncing me. Well, a lot of us experience life this way, don't we? There are times when it feels like everything's going wrong. All of our fears are being realized. All of our best efforts have met with failure. But now listen to him as he continues. But the Lord is with me like a mighty champion. My persecutors will stumble. They will not triumph. In the midst of his fears, and they are profound, he experiences a deeper peace. Yes, terror on every side. Every human being is against me. But in the midst of it, I experience this great peace because God is my champion. Notice, please, God being his champion does not mean that the fears go away. Oh, because since God's on my side, I won't have any fear. No one's going to denounce me. I'm going to be a total worldly success. No. Jeremiah was a failure his whole life long, and he died a failure. He died with people denouncing him on every side. Yet in the midst of it, despite all that, he felt the peace that comes from knowing that God is his champion. Think of Teresa of Avila's famous image of the interior castle. Well, the very existence of a castle presupposes trouble. You wouldn't build a fortified castle unless there were enemies out to get you, unless you were surrounded on every side by danger. But despite the dangers, in the midst of the dangers, there's this castle, this place of safety and peace. That's the place, everybody, that the saints find. Now, with that in mind, let's turn to the gospel, which is giving us a similar dynamic. Jesus said to the 12, fear no one. Extraordinary, huh? The Lord said, fear no one. Then he amplifies. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Now we see, if you want to put it this way, the metaphysical ground of this dynamic I've been talking about. Don't fear those paper tigers who can only harm the body, but cannot touch the soul. What's the soul? Call it that deepest, central part of us through which we have contact with God. So yeah, I'm surrounded by terrors on every side. I've got enemies all around me. I've got failures and fears and anxieties all around me. But at the level of my soul, I am connected to that power which is here and now creating the universe. In my soul, the depth of who I am, I'm in touch with that which transcends space and time, that which lies beyond the vagaries of this world, that which mocks all those fears that surround me. Don't be afraid of those that can only harm the body, but can't touch this deepest place in me. See, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of all these enemies around me. I'm afraid of being a failure. I'm afraid of not realizing my dreams. I'm afraid of what they're all going to say and think about me. Paper tigers. Don't be afraid of those who can harm the body. Indeed, listen what the Lord says. Not just harm the body, who can kill the body. So, okay, I've got such enemies. I have so many persecutors. They're going to put me to death. Yeah, I know, says the Lord. Don't be afraid of them. Why? Because they cannot reach to that deepest, immortal, spiritual dimension of yourself that we call the soul. Now, remember that question I opened up with. What are you afraid of? So let's say you follow the Lord here and you say, okay, I'm not afraid of these paper tigers that can only kill my body. Listen what he says now. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Okay, now we're getting to really serious business. Don't be afraid of those on the outside. Terror on every side. Yeah, I know. All they can do is harm your body. But do indeed be afraid of the one who can kill both body and soul. In other words, have in you the fear of the Lord. See, because your soul, through resistance to God, can lose the contact with God. That's its natural space, of course. The soul naturally is attuned to God, but through that sin that we call mortal sin, a killing sin, it can divorce itself from God. So be afraid of that one. Be afraid of the God who can kill both body and soul. Do you see how what's at stake here, everybody, is a kind of prioritizing of our fears? What's most fearsome to you? Oh, all these things out in the world that can harm me. That's nothing. Compared to your relationship with God. If the soul has died, say through sin and through neglect of God and through hatred of God, if the soul has died, then you are really in trouble. Don't worry about the paper tigers who can just harm your body. Now, there's the principle. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples because where do you see this? You see this dynamic in the saints. Think of young Karl Wojtyła, the kid that grew up to be St. Pope John Paul II. He experienced the worst of the world. As a young kid, the Nazis invade his home country, indeed his home city. Put to death, thousands of people, killed off the intelligentsia of Poland, forced him and his seminary classmates underground. The Auschwitz was just a few miles from where John Paul II was going to school. Then they were succeeded by the communists, who were maybe slight improvement, but not that much over the Nazis. Another oppressive regime. Here's someone who experienced the worst of humanity. Talk about forces that were able to harm the body, to kill the body. Yes, indeed, he knew all about it. But yet when he becomes Pope, what does he say? Be not afraid. He's echoing Jesus in this gospel who says, fear nobody. He saw the worst of humanity. Never accused John Paul II of being naive about human wickedness. No. He saw it up close. But yet he knew about this peace that abides at the level of the soul. And that's where he lived. Think of that wonderful saint from the Cristero period in Mexico, when there was such a brutal persecution of the church. But little Jose Sanchez del Rio, 14 years old. I often tell this story when I'm doing the confirmation masses, because the kids here are like the 14, 15, same age. Here's Jose Sanchez del Rio, captured by the enemies of the church, and offered every opportunity. Hey, we'll make you famous. We'll make you rich if you just, cave in. That would have been a great propaganda coup for them. But this young kid, he wasn't afraid of them. They tortured him. They badgered him. They tortured him psychologically and physically. He wasn't afraid of them. And finally, they killed him. But he wasn't afraid of those who can just kill the body. Rather, he had the fear of the Lord. He was more afraid of the one who can kill both body and soul. In other words, he maintained his connection to God. That's what makes him a saint. One more example. I was just thinking about him because as I record these words, we had his feast day a little while ago. The great St. Charles Lwanga, the great saint of Uganda, young man in the court of the king. The king makes sexual advances toward him. He refuses. The king tells him he has to give up his faith. He refuses. And Charles Lwanga, all of 25 years old, is burned alive in a place called Namugongo. That's now where 1 million Catholics descend every year on his feast day to honor him. Was he afraid of those who could harm the body? Even kill the body? I wasn't afraid of them. He was more afraid of the one who could kill both body and soul. In other words, he maintained his connection to God. I love the detail that as he died, he's being burned alive. As he died, the only thing people heard him say was a long sigh, "Oh God." In other words, he maintained his connection at the level of the soul with God, despite the worst persecution of the world. Terror on every side, you bet, from Jeremiah to Charles Lwanga to John Paul II. But what are you afraid of? Finally, what are you afraid of? Those that can harm the body? Or do you have the fear of the Lord? Do you maintain a contact with the Lord at the level of your soul? Finally, everybody, that's all that matters. And God bless you.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute.
Lord Rush Limbaugh's on by the Rush Hawkins Singers is exactly what's called for.
Yeah.
Limbaugh's on.
Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.